I never imagined a single sentence could permanently end a sibling relationship. But when my daughter came running toward me, eyes red, chest heaving, clutching the cheap little purse she'd been so proud of, I knew something had broken beyond repair. I was standing near the driveway of my sister's house, balancing a paper plate of food I suddenly didn't want, when Emily crashed into me. She said I shouldn't be here, my daughter sobbed. She said there was no room for kids like me. I followed her shaking finger back toward the patio. That's when I saw my sister, Heather, leaning against the marble countertop, wine glass in hand, lips curled into a smug smile, the kind she'd practiced her whole life. "No room for your discount store kids at this party," she said again, louder this time. Not to me. To the crowd. People laughed. Not loudly. Uncomfortably. And that's when I realized Heather didn't just want to humiliate my daughter. She wanted to remind me exactly where she thought I belonged. She had no idea what that moment would cost her. I should have known better when Heather Collins texted me after months of silence. My older sister never reached out unless she wanted an audience, leverage, or proof that her life was still shinier than mine. The invitation sounded casual, almost generous, but every word carried the weight of judgment I'd grown up with. She said she was hosting a small get-together, emphasized the dress code, and paused long enough before mentioning my daughter that the message was clear. Emily was an afterthought. I stared around my tiny apartment while reading the text, noticing chipped paint and thrift store furniture I'd learned to love. Emily sat at the kitchen table coloring hearts, humming softly, completely unaware that her aunt already viewed her as a problem. I typed a polite response anyway, because declining would have turned into another family lecture about resentment, forgiveness, and how Heather had always meant well. Later that night, I told Emily about the party. Her face lit up instantly. She asked if she could wear her favorite blue dress, the one we'd found on clearance and altered together. She asked if she could bring her sparkly purse, bought with saved allowance. I said yes, to everything, smiling while my stomach tightened. I never wanted my daughter to feel like she had to earn permission to exist. The morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror too long, adjusting a blouse that looked nicer than it was. I curled my hair, reapplied mascara, and reminded myself that survival wasn't failure. I worked 2 jobs, paid my bills, and raised a kind child alone. That should have been enough anywhere. But Heather's world ran on different rules. Appearances mattered more than effort. Price tags mattered more than character. I told myself this was just a family obligation, just a few hours, just one night of tolerating sideways looks for the sake of peace. As we drove to her house, Emily squeezed my hand and smiled out the window. I smiled back, ignoring the quiet dread settling in my chest. Deep down, I already knew this invitation wasn't kindness. It was a test. And no matter how prepared I thought I was, I didn't yet understand how cruel Heather was willing to be. That realization would soon change how I saw family, loyalty, and the quiet strength required to protect my child from unnecessary cruelty forever. At Heather's house looked less like a home and more like a showroom, all white stone, trimmed hedges, and a driveway packed with expensive cars. Emily slowed as we walked up, tightening her grip on my hand. She whispered that everyone looked fancy, her voice small, already shrinking. I told her she looked perfect, because she did, even if perfection meant something different in this neighborhood. Inside, the air smelled like catered food and expensive perfume. Crystal glasses clinked while a soft jazz playlist floated through hidden speakers. Heather glided through the crowd like she owned every breath in the room. When she spotted us, her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. She hugged me lightly, careful not to wrinkle her dress, then glanced down at Emily with polite disinterest. Guests asked questions that felt more like inspections. Where did I work now? Was I still renting? Did Emily attend public school? Each answer shortened the conversations. People drifted away politely, already scanning for someone more impressive. I recognized the subtle recalculations in their eyes. I'd lived with them my whole life. Emily wandered toward the other kids, her sparkly purse clutched tight. They wore matching outfits, clean sneakers that probably cost more than my grocery budget. She stood near them, smiling, waiting to be included. One girl whispered something. Another glanced at Emily's dress. They walked away together, leaving her standing alone by the pool. I watched my daughter straighten her shoulders and pretend she didn't care. That quiet bravery hurt worse than tears. Heather passed me again and leaned close, her voice low. She mentioned that gifts were meant for the host's children and suggested Emily stay out of the main area. She smiled while saying it, like it was helpful advice. Emily returned to my side, asking softly where she was supposed to stand. She pointed toward a small space near the garage, half hidden from the party. I felt heat rise behind my eyes but forced myself to breathe. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want Emily to feel worse. Still, every laugh felt sharper, every glance heavier. We weren't guests. We were tolerated. Decorations glittered, music played, and Heather soaked in admiration, while my daughter slowly disappeared beside me. I realized then that this night wasn't about family. It was about reminding me where Heather believed we belonged. And it wasn't here. I was standing near the drinks table, trying to look relaxed while keeping Emily in my line of sight, when the sound cut through the music. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp hitch of breath, then a sob that didn't belong at a party. I turned just as Emily came running toward me, her small face crumpled, cheeks flushed, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. She crashed into my legs and wrapped her arms around me, crying so hard she could barely breathe. People nearby fell quiet, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. I knelt, brushing her hair back, asking what happened, already feeling dread coil in my stomach. When she finally spoke, her words came out broken and uneven. She said there's no room for your discount store kids at this party, Emily sobbed. She said I don't belong. For a moment, everything went still. I felt cold spread through my chest, a numbness so sharp it almost hurt. I looked up slowly, following Emily's trembling finger. Heather stood a few feet away, wine glass in hand, lips curved into a satisfied smirk. She didn't look surprised. She looked pleased. Is there a problem? She asked, loud enough for others to hear. I stood, my hands shaking despite my effort to stay calm. You said that to my daughter? Heather tilted her head, pretending to think. I was just being honest. This isn't exactly a playdate. Some people value a certain standard. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one defended us. Heather shrugged lightly, as if she'd commented on the weather instead of crushing a child. Kids like her don't fit the atmosphere. Emily pressed her face into my side, crying harder. I waited, foolishly, for Heather to realize what she'd done. To apologize. To soften. She didn't. She took a sip of wine and turned back to her audience, dismissing us entirely. That was the moment something inside me snapped clean in half. Not rage, not screaming anger, but clarity. I understood exactly who my sister was and who she would never be. I picked up Emily, gathered our things, and walked out without another word. Behind us, the music resumed. Heather didn't follow. She didn't need to. She already believed she'd won. The silence after we left felt heavier than the insult itself. Emily cried quietly in the car, exhausted more than upset now, her head resting against the window as streetlights passed like slow blinks. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on her knee, grounding both of us, replaying Heather's words over and over. By the time we reached home, my phone was already buzzing. The first message came from my mother. She asked what happened, though the tone suggested she already knew. I explained, carefully, what Heather had said to Emily. There was a pause before her reply. I'm sure she didn't mean it like that, she wrote. You know how your sister jokes. Then came my aunt, then a cousin. Every message followed the same pattern. Heather was stressed. Heather worked hard. Heather didn't grow up with much either. No one asked how Emily was. No one asked how I felt watching my child humiliated in public. The responsibility to smooth things over landed, as it always did, squarely on me. My mother called later that night. She sighed heavily, like she was already tired of the conversation. "You embarrassed Heather by leaving like that," she said. "People noticed." "She embarrassed my daughter," I replied. "Well, Emily is sensitive," my mother said gently, "the way people speak when they think they're being reasonable. Heather's world is different. You can't expect her to change how she lives." That sentence finally cracked something open. Heather's world. As if cruelty were a lifestyle choice I should respect. As if my child's feelings were collateral damage for maintaining appearances. I ended the call politely and sat on the couch in the dark. Emily slept curled beside me, tear tracks still faint on her cheeks. I watched her breathe and realized how long this pattern had existed. Heather insulted. I absorbed. The family excused. I adapted. Peace was maintained by my silence. The next morning, Heather posted photos from the party online. Smiling guests. Perfect lighting. Comments praising her elegance and generosity. I stared at those images longer than I should have. They told a story that didn't include my daughter crying in my arms. That was when I understood something important. Heather's power came from the way people saw her. From the illusion she curated so carefully. And illusions, once questioned, don't survive scrutiny. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't defend myself. I started paying attention instead. Family had chosen a side. Now I knew exactly where I stood. I didn't wake up the next morning planning revenge. What I woke up with was clarity, the kind that settles and after shock fades. Heather hadn't misspoken. She hadn't joked badly. She had said exactly what she believed, and she had said it because she thought there would be no consequences. That realization changed how I looked at everything connected to her. Once I stopped reacting emotionally, I started noticing details I'd ignored for years. Heather's lifestyle looked flawless online, but cracks appeared when I slowed down. She talked constantly about charity work, yet never mentioned outcomes. She hosted fundraisers, but no one could clearly explain where the money went. Brian bragged about real estate deals, but always dodged specifics, always changed subjects when numbers came up. I didn't dig like a villain. I listened like a sister who finally stopped trusting. At family gatherings, I asked neutral questions. I nodded while Heather talked about herself, because she always did. People who love attention rarely guard their words. They assume admiration equals loyalty. I noticed that the unpaid contractors are complaining online. I noticed a charity board quietly removing Heather's name. I noticed how often new donations were actually sponsored favors that came with strings attached. None of it was illegal on its own, but together it painted a picture very different from the generous image she sold. The most unsettling part wasn't the money. It was the pattern. Heather built her status by standing on people who didn't fight back. Vendors, acquaintances, relatives. And me. I had been convenient. Silent. Predictable. I thought about Emily, about how easily Heather had dismissed her pain, how comfortable she'd been doing it publicly. That cruelty didn't exist in isolation. It was reinforced by years of never being challenged. I started saving things. Screenshots of posts later deleted. Emails were sent accidentally to the wrong group. Public records that anyone could access, but no one bothered to check. I didn't confront Heather. I didn't hint. I let her believe the moment had passed. At night, after Emily fell asleep, I organized information into folders. Calmly. Methodically. Not out of spite, but preparation. I didn't know yet what I would do with the truth. I only knew I would never again be caught defenseless. Heather believed her world was untouchable because it looked beautiful from the outside. She forgot that appearances require maintenance, and maintenance requires silence. I had spent years being quiet. Now I was simply paying attention. And for the first time, the imbalance between us was shifting, slowly, invisibly, but permanently. I didn't rush anything after that. If there was one thing Heather taught me, it was that impulsive reactions only ever benefited her. She thrived on drama she could control. What unsettled people like her was patience. Silence. Someone who stopped explaining themselves. Life on the surface went back to normal. I worked, cooked, helped Emily with homework, drove her to therapy appointments without making a big deal out of them. She started opening up about how small she'd felt at the party, how embarrassed she was that people laughed. We talked through it slowly. I made sure she understood one thing clearly: none of it had been her fault. Ever. While healing her, I prepared quietly for myself. I stopped venting to family. I stopped responding to indirect comments and guilt-laced messages. That absence alone made Heather uneasy. She texted once, casually, asking if I was still upset. I replied politely and briefly. No accusations. No forgiveness. Just neutrality. It confused her more than anger ever could. Behind the scenes, I kept collecting information. I verified everything twice. I cross-checked names, dates, public filings. I spoke to people Heather assumed would never talk to me. When you stop being predictable, doors open unexpectedly. Some people were relieved to finally be honest. Others just wanted their own quiet vindication. I made rules for myself. Nothing illegal. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing emotional. Truth only mattered if it was undeniable. I documented timelines and saved originals, not screenshots alone. I learned patience I didn't know I possessed. There were nights I wanted to confront her. Nights I replayed her voice saying, "discount store kids," and felt my jaw tighten. But I reminded myself this wasn't about humiliating Heather the way she humiliated my daughter. That kind of revenge would still orbit her. This was about balance. Heather's confidence came from believing she controlled every narrative. She counted on my family's habit of smoothing things over. She counted on my silence. Preparation meant removing every advantage she assumed she had. As weeks passed, invitations went out for her annual charity event, the one she bragged about all year. The one filled with donors, board members, and the same people who had laughed uncomfortably at my daughter. I accepted the invitation without comment. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. Quiet preparation doesn't look like revenge. It looks like a restraint. It looks like healing your child first. And it looks like waiting until the truth can stand on its own, without shouting, without cruelty, and without giving the other person anywhere left to hide. At Heather's annual charity gala arrived like a storm. The same polished floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same faces who had watched Emily cry weeks before. I arrived quietly, Emily beside me, her hand gripping mine, not as a shield but as a witness. She had nothing to prove tonight. Heather was about to expose herself. I moved calmly through the room, greeting a few guests with warmth and sincerity. No drama. No glaring accusations. Just presence. Heather spotted me from across the room and smiled, smug, confident. The kind of smile that assumes you are powerless. I returned only a polite nod. That tiny gesture was enough to make her pause. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and finally, the moment came. I was invited to speak, under the guise of a short introduction about community support. I stepped up with Emily quietly at my side. I began with calm acknowledgement of Heather's contributions, keeping my tone measured. Then I slowly introduced verifiable facts, financial inconsistencies, mismanaged charity funds, and emails that contradicted her success stories. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I let the evidence speak. The room went silent. Faces shifted. Some guests whispered to one another. Heather's confident smile faltered. Brian's jaw tightened. Heather tried to interject, but I had anticipated her protests and addressed each claim with calm, documented clarity. There was no emotional outburst, no dramatic flourish, just facts. Simple, undeniable, and public. By the time I stepped down, the tension was suffocating. The same people who had smiled politely at her dominance now looked confused, shocked, and uncertain. Heather had lost control. Her reputation, built on appearances and carefully managed narratives, was cracking. And she knew it. I felt no glee. Just relief. Emily looked up at me with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and pride. She had witnessed a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't scream or lash out, the kind that simply refuses to be silenced. Heather slumped slightly in her chair, her posture stiff. Her allies shifted nervously. For the first time, she was on the defensive, and the room could see it. That night, the lesson for everyone was clear: cruelty, when unchecked, eventually meets accountability. I left the stage quietly, holding Emily's hand. She didn't need to speak. The silence spoke volumes. The days after the gala were surreal. Heather didn't contact me. Not once. Her social media posts became defensive, subtle attempts to reclaim her image. Invitations that had previously arrived in glossy envelopes stopped. People who had once smiled at her carefully curated perfection now hesitated, unsure of the truth they had witnessed. I focused on Emily. She returned to school with the confidence I hadn't seen before. Her art projects, her little performances in class, even her interactions with friends, all carried a quiet pride. The sting of Heather's words was still there, but it no longer had power over her. She knew she belonged where she was loved and respected. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate publicly. Heather's downfall wasn't a personal trophy. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices. The family members who had once defended her in whispers now approached me with caution and awkward apologies. Some never approached at all, quietly taking sides without saying a word. That didn't matter. I didn't need validation from them anymore. The real victory wasn't in humiliation. It was in setting boundaries. It was in demonstrating that words could not destroy us when we refused to internalize them. Heather would no longer have the power to shame us publicly. Emily and I had reclaimed our dignity. I bought Emily a small bracelet, simple but elegant, something she could wear every day as a reminder that she deserved respect. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thanks, Mom. I feel brave now." I smiled, thinking about all the small moments we had endured together, the whispered insults, the sideways looks, the unkind words, and how each had prepared us for this quiet triumph. I didn't speak to Heather again. Not because I wanted revenge or because I hated her, but because peace required distance. Some battles are won not through confrontation, but through disengagement and calm authority. Emily thrived. I thrived. Our lives were no longer measured by someone else's definition of worth. Heather remained in the neighborhood, hosting parties, maintaining appearances, but the illusion she depended on had cracked. People could see through it now. Sometimes, I would catch Emily laughing freely, completely unaware of the old tension, and I would smile, knowing the lesson she learned was far more valuable than any spectacle of revenge. Strength isn't loud. Strength is quiet. It is deliberate. It is enduring. And it is ours. We had survived her cruelty, protected our dignity, and emerged stronger than ever. That was the real win. Weeks passed after the gala, and life settled into a rhythm I had longed for but rarely experienced. Heather's smirk no longer haunted my thoughts. Her words, once sharp enough to cut through my confidence, had lost all power. Emily and I moved freely in the world Heather had tried to confine us to, without seeking permission or approval. Our lives no longer revolved around someone else's sense of superiority. Emily laughed more, played more, and even dressed herself proudly in the little outfits she loved, without hesitation. One afternoon, she held up her sparkly purse, smiled, and said, "Mom, I like this. It's mine. I don't care what anyone says." That was when I realized the real victory wasn't in exposing Heather publicly, it was in reclaiming our sense of self-worth. Emily had learned resilience. She had learned confidence. And she had learned that no one, not even a cruel aunt, could define her value. I, too, had discovered a new strength within myself, a calm, quiet power that comes from patience, preparation, and choosing dignity over drama. I no longer waited for family validation, nor allowed myself to shrink in someone else's shadow. Heather existed in her meticulously curated world, but her influence over us had vanished. People could see through her facade now, and she could no longer weaponize appearances against me or my daughter. Some family members continued their alliances, some apologized in muted tones, and some stayed silent. None of it mattered. Our lives were no longer entangled in Heather's need to dominate. For the first time, I felt the space to breathe, to nurture my daughter, and to truly protect her from cruelty that masqueraded as superiority. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, brushing her hair back and smiling at her glowing face, I whispered softly, "You're brave. You're strong. And nothing anyone says can change that." She smiled in her sleep, a small but unbreakable victory. Strength is not loud. Strength is deliberate, patient, and enduring. Heather had assumed control by humiliating us, but control requires consent. We withheld ours. We survived the cruelty, reclaimed our dignity, and emerged stronger, together. And that, I realized, was the truest measure of success. The chapter with Heather had closed, not with anger, but with serenity. Our lives had shifted. We had won, not through confrontation, but through resilience, love, and quiet, undeniable truth.